So we're just going to get started. This is again just a conversation with you guys, give you guys an opportunity to hear from the commissioner and ask any questions that you have. We're going to keep this no more than 30 minutes, and we're going to keep this focused on this one particular topic. So, Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Kim. All right, I appreciate y'all coming this afternoon. Yesterday, as you all know, I rejected the proposed Little Rock School District professional negotiated agreement, and I directed Mr. Poore to present modified language in two specific sections of the agreement. The reason for this is the recently released 2018 school ratings for the district reflect insufficient progress in improving academic performance in several schools. This troubles me greatly, and I would think that it would trouble the entire community. And when you dig deeper than just the letter grades, you quickly see that there are a significant number of students across all student groups, whether you're talking about special ed, African American, Latino, English learners, that are not being served currently, and it's something that we need to take action to correct. When the state board took the action of taking over the district in January of 2015, that was in response to the state's obligation to meet the needs of students, not to meet the needs of adults. And here we are a little over 3.5 years into my tenure, and there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. So under Act 930 of 2017, which just became effective with the rules and regs recently, the state board has the authority to waive laws regarding teacher fair dismissal for school districts in level 5 intensive support, which is what Little Rock is in. And as a district in that category, the district needs greater flexibility to address staffing changes in the struggling schools than what the negotiated agreement currently allows. So the change, and I'll briefly talk about the changes that I asked for. One was in the recognition paragraph. The old P&A, the one that's been in place each year for the last 3 years during the time that I've approved them, says in accordance with board policy, the recognition of LREA will continue so long as it is deemed by the Board of Education to be in the best interest of the employees and district. The proposed language says the LRSD shall continue its recognition of the LREA throughout the term of the agreement and during negotiations for a successor agreement. That language would create a situation where recognition would be in perpetuity as long as it's being negotiated. So no definition of what being in negotiation means, so we just need to tighten that up back to what it said in the past. And then the one that's of most significance here is under board authority. You know, right now there is a section in that paragraph or a sentence that says nothing in the agreement shall limit LRSD's statutory right to petition the State Board of Education for waivers pursuant to Arkansas Code 615-103 while adhering to the Arkansas Teachers Fair Dismissal Act and the Public School Employee Fair Hearing Act. So in the agreement itself, regardless of what it says in Act 930, the union agreement, the professional negotiated agreement, basically has a block there to anything dealing with teacher fair dismissal. So the language that I've directed Mr. Poore to propose simply says, however, the LREA and LRSD acknowledge the district is under level 5 intensive support pursuant to Arkansas Code 615-2916 and agree to support a waiver of the Arkansas Teacher Fair Dismissal Act and the Public School Employee Fair Hearing Act only for schools receiving a grade of D or F under the Arkansas Public School Rating System. There are 22 of those schools in the district. And in those 22 schools, you're at right under 11,000 students total. That's almost half of the students in the Little Rock School District. So work has been done, a lot of progress has been made, but it has been inconsistent. And it's to this point been insufficient. So this is a step to provide another tool in the toolbox to help principals, to help Mr. Poore, to help his leadership team create the atmosphere, create the conditions for more improvement and make it happen sooner than what we've experienced so far. So with that, I'll take your questions.
How did we go from 6 distressed schools to 22 since the state has taken over LRSP?
That was under the old accountability system. So under the previous accountability system, where we had academic distress, there were 6 schools that were classified under academic distress. So that was what the conditions were at the time. Well, now we've moved to a new accountability system, federal and state accountability system. And so we're not looking at that old definition of academic distress now. We're looking at a lot more factors.
So you're saying that back when it was 6, there could have been more, could have been 22 back then? Or?
Well, those were the 6 that were in academic distress. So there were a number of other schools that under the previous No Child Left Behind had some type of classification, whether it was a focus school or a priority school, or even before that, you had schools in years, like year 6 of school improvement or year 7 of school improvement. So going back all the way into the mid-2000s, there were a number of schools that have been struggling, which were all factors that I think the state board took into account when they made that decision, not just the 6 schools in academic distress.
But okay, but just so I know, for a simple answer, could there have been more than 6 schools in distress had we used this new system to grade them back then?
Well, it's possible. I mean, there were, we had limited, at that point, experience with the letter grades. But the schools that are seeing the low letter grades now are many of the same schools that were struggling then under different definitions.
Can you tell us about some of the approaches or things that have been done by the State Department of Education since the takeover to
Sure.
try to minimize that 22?
Yeah. So at the very outset, we received a federal grant. It's called a SPDIG grant, but basically it's focused on meeting the needs of struggling learners, and had teams working with the schools to put some things in place to improve the conditions there. More recently, over the last 2 years, we've been working on the RISE Arkansas and trying to get that into the Little Rock schools, the same as we've been doing around the state, to work on reading. And then here most recently, the professional learning communities process, that really hasn't had enough time to take root, but those are some of the steps that we're taking currently and will continue to take to try to improve the conditions.
Could you talk about what happens next? That you go to the state board and ask them for the waiver.
Yeah.
If they approve it, then what happens? What do you envision happening?
Well, at that point, the terms of contracts change in the DNF schools, and now with this P&A in place, nothing changes, because if the current language of the P&A basically says it doesn't matter if the state board granted a waiver of teacher fair dismissal, because the contractual agreement says we're going to abide by it anyway. So, so without that in the contract and with the approval of the state board, in most cases there may not be anything that would happen, but the district and principals would have greater flexibility in making staffing decisions, staffing changes as they move forward, getting ready for the 19 school year, 2019-20.
So they wouldn't expect to have staffing changes in mid-school year?
No,
2019.
no, that would not be my intent at all, and it wouldn't be. I'm not sure that it would even be drastic. I'm pretty sure that it would not be drastic. This would be a tool that I think it wouldn't be used as a chainsaw. It'd be more like a scalpel to address those things where principals can identify the issues that need to be addressed and make those changes.
I talked to the Education Association earlier today, and they had mentioned that since you guys have taken over, there have been no, and forgive me if it's the wrong terminology, requests to fire any teachers or certified teachers. Is this what's stopping them from requesting this? Because the school doesn't want to go through the due process with the board, or what?
Well, I can tell you what Mr. Poor told me, that it takes about 2 years to follow all those steps to be able to terminate a teacher for lack of performance. Now, obviously, There have been terminations for other reasons, not just teachers, but assistant principals, or I don't know how many, but there have been some. I think the best people to answer that question would be the principals. You know, to asking them, look, you know, there are, and they've reported to me that there are situations where they need to make some moves, but they're hamstrung by the process.
So in those particular situations, have they tried to use fair dismissal to do it?
Well, because I don't get all that background until, and a board wouldn't get that until it came to them. I don't know how many of those could have created a scenario where a termination under teacher fair dismissal would have come into play.
So, I mean, can you cite any specific examples of trying to use fair dismissal to get rid of a problematic teacher and it not being sufficient?
Specifically, no, because as I said, that would not get to me unless it had followed throughout the process. I can tell you that early on there was a pre-K teacher that sought protection through the process, and it went through, and there was a termination there, and in that case there was a very good reason. That's the only one I remember that actually got to the point that it came to me for a situation that occurred in a classroom.
Well, I mean, if that process wasn't working, though, I would imagine that the superintendent or somebody would approach you and say this policy needs to be changed, or what can you do about it?
Well, it hasn't been an option until just recently.
Because of the P&A?
Because of the P&A, and because the district could not seek a waiver under teacher fair dismissal until Act 930 and the rules associated with that had actually come into play.
Can you tell me
For the
what-
I'm talking about the waiver, Benji. So a lot of those things just would not have gotten to me.
Can you tell me about the 2 years? I mean, who's delaying this? Is this the teacher delaying it? Is it the board dragging their feet? I mean, 2 years? I've seen murder trials go quicker than that. So what's...
Yeah, that's a good question for Mr. Poore and his administration team. I don't know the intricacies of what happens through that time, but I do know that there are significant delays that have happened, that principals have given me feedback that says we need to make moves, but we can't. And there needs to be some help given to us. And this is very targeted. I mean, it's very isolated to these schools where, frankly, you've got almost 11,000 kids that are in schools that have not been performing over the last several years. So it's again, it's not all teachers. As a matter of fact, I was at a school this week and got to have my annual visit with Nona Whitaker. She's a GT teacher, and it's amazing what she does with her class. And we had a spelling bee, and I was a guest and had some of my team there. Also, knowing that some of the other teachers, I mean, my goodness, we got the Arkansas Teacher of the Year at Central High School. So this isn't a, bashing teachers. It is simply saying, look, if this tool is needed, it's not available right now. This would make it available if it becomes necessary. And with all the other things we've tried, this is one thing that's been blocked. Other districts, that could have gone through some of these processes. Little Rock is one that has not, and it's because of what the current phrase that I read to you in the P&A.
And you said when it was targeted, so making this open is really to help the 22 schools and their principals be able to do this, but it would still be an option for all schools across the board once it's no longer part of the agreement.
No. The language that I have asked Mr. Poore to propose is for the DNF schools. No, it's not. It would not be applicable across the board.
So just these 22 schools give these
Right.
principals the options of
Yes.
waiving this?
Yes, and let's be real. It's not just the principals. It's also there may be principals where that need to be situations need to be addressed in struggling schools. You know, I know that has been a factor that Mr. Poore and I have talked about, is we need to look at the leadership in these schools. Maybe it's not what's going on in the classrooms. Maybe it's what's going on with the culture. So that's something that, you know, there are protections that are in place now for principals that this would open it up to provide that tool to address some of those issues too.
Is there a deadline? The current PNA, I think, expires October 31st. So
Yeah.
do the teams, negotiating teams, have to come to the agreement on this language by that day?
Barring any type of an agreed upon extension, yes. But, you know, I know, I think I can safely say, you know, the union would say, well, we've already negotiated this. You know, we have come to an agreement. And yes, they did. You know, they came to an agreement with Mr. Poore, but that does not mean that that in my authority or role here, that I just take whatever they agree upon. It still has to, I mean, I'm still responsible for reading it, understanding the impact of it, and approving it or not approving it. So to say that there's some bad faith on my part, as has been alleged, is simply ignoring my responsibility to look at these things. Even if they have been negotiated, I have to look at it for the bigger picture.
Would you go back to the table with the Education Association and Poore? I know that you guys don't really meet, but I understand they meet with Poore.
And that, yes.
When I spoke to them earlier today, they mentioned the deadline, you know, tonight, and apparently they're going to be meeting to discuss what do they plan on wanting to do, either vote to go back to the table, vote to strike, whatever the case may be, because they're saying they're not going to accept these terms in this language. So are you willing to go back to the table, or this is what you're putting out and this is what you want?
This is what I've directed Mr. Poore to present. If there is, if they want to present something back, if they want to bring an alternative that helps get at some of the issues that we're having in these DNF schools, then I'm open to it.
What's the evidence specifically that teachers are the problem, that staffing is the problem?
Well, over half, this is across the district, over half of the classroom teachers in 17 and 18 were absent 10 days or more. I mean, if we expect our students to show up, if we're worried about chronic absenteeism with our students, which is defined at that 10-day plus, and over half of our classroom teachers are absent, meeting that same definition, then that is a problem. That's not a problem with teachers. That may be a problem with scheduling. That may be a problem with PD. That may be a problem with culture. But 50%, I mean, something has to give, and this is simply one of those tools that says, look, if you're not going to come to work, we've got to get somebody in those classrooms that will be there and can do the job and will do the job. So that's one important piece of evidence, and that's not new. I mean, when you go back into the reports from the priority focus schools, the academic distress schools, under the old academic distress model, well, that was one of the things that was tracked at the school level. And some schools saw improvement, but a lot of schools didn't see any improvement in that. And that was something that has been worked on for years to try to address just a teacher absenteeism issue.
So if there's going to be sort of two classes of schools in the district where some buildings fair dismissal applies and other buildings fair dismissal doesn't apply, are you concerned that that would make it less attractive to work in the buildings where you have no employment protections?
No, I'm not, because there are teachers right now that are not members of LREA. There would be protection because will still be grievance situation that's in the PNA. I didn't change any of that. So there's still a grievance process. So if it's due process that you're concerned about, or if, not you specifically, but if it's due process someone is concerned about and making it less attractive, there is due process. It's still in place. It just doesn't end with those the components of teacher fair dismissal that's currently in statute.
And do you plan, I mean, there's plenty of other DNF schools in the state outside
Yeah.
Little Rock that don't have P&As. Are you planning on seeking the same sort of thing in all those other schools?
Well, the state board hasn't taken over those schools. They're the district that we are working in now, that we are just now getting a sense of what's going on there in Pine Bluff. So, you know, we will have a conversation with the superintendent there of what are the things that need to happen there. But to blanket, throw a blanket across all of the DNF schools across the state, you know, that's not realistic because those schools aren't under state control.
Losing a few teachers, maybe just a few or maybe several at those schools, people say there's a teacher shortage. How will those positions be filled?
Well, there is a teacher shortage, but there's not a personnel shortage. I mean, there are licensed teachers in other roles, not just in Little Rock, but across the state. And there are a lot of teachers also that currently aren't working. I mean, we know from our records that there are teachers that, licensed teachers, for whatever reason aren't working. I don't think that becomes a major issue. I think if there are openings, that we'll be able to fill those.
What would your response be that since 2015 with the takeover that there's been 3 different kinds of testing
Yeah.
been implemented?
Well, that's just
and
not
the
true.
effect?
I mean, that's just not true. We've had the ACT Aspire for 3 years now. And so the scores that we have reflect students that have taken the same assessment for 3 years. Spring of 16, spring of 17, spring of 18. So it's not about the assessment.
So it's not 3 different tests?
No.
'Cause the association is saying that you guys are comparing numbers to 3 different tests and then blaming teachers for why, and they don't even know
Yeah.
how you're crunching numbers for 3 different tests.
Well, that's just incorrect.
So it's the ACT 3 times?
ACT Aspire 3 times.
Okay, and same students taking the same ACT for 3 years with the same questions?
Through the,
Or
yes.
whatever the
Yeah,
questions
through
are,
grades,
ACT.
Your
grades 3 through 8.
academic stress classification looked backwards several years at previous test scores, right?
Okay, ask me that again, Benji,
The
sorry.
academic distress classification looked backwards, not just at one-year test scores, but
I believe they looked at 3 years, a 3-year rolling average.
So it did take into account those previous tests, did it not?
Now, 2018 was the 3rd year, so the results that are there are rolling since 2016. The 15-16 school year was the first year we took ACT Aspire statewide.
Right, but I'm saying academic distress in 2015 would look backwards also to the part.
Well, it would have then. I'm not sure how that applies to now, though, because we're talking about DNF schools based on today's accountability system.
Which includes the scores of 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18.
Correct. Yes.
I guess, what kind of message, I guess, are you trying to send about what you're trying to do with LRSD? Because obviously the association says it's a clear message that you don't respect teachers, respect what they do, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
what is your message coming from you?
My message is we've got to be about the kids, and you cannot defend 11,000 kids being in a DNF school without some major initiative to try to turn that around. You know, there is work going on every day by great teachers in this district. There are processes, there are systems in place that are not providing what kids need. I mean, I think that's very apparent from the results that we've seen. And this effort is intended to provide another tool to create those systems. The academic system and the human capital system are intricately woven. And if you have a weakness on the academic system, then there are a number of things you have to look at on the human capital system. This is just one piece of that, but it's an important piece. And so the message is, this is an effort to try to make things better for those 11,000 kids that are in struggling schools right now. And many of them have been struggling for years. So that's my message. That's why I feel like this is the time for for us to have this conversation.
So we have time for one more question, and then Commissioner, if you want to, any closing
Okay.
remarks?
I have a question from a listener who's a former teacher. She would like to know, what responsibility do you and the state bear for the drop-in scores?
I would question what the drop-in scores mean. I mean, you're talking about a long-term track record in these schools that we're talking about. And as I said, there have been increases, there have been improvements, but they've been inconsistent. You had Baseline, you had Fair, you had McClellan that got off of the old academic distress system. Now they've slipped back and are struggling, which means that there were the improvements there, the gains were simply not consistent, and they simply, wasn't just wasn't ongoing, and that's what we have to get to. Whether it's through this conversation or the broader conversation that we continue to have, something has to change for all these kids.
Commissioner, do you have any closing remarks?
No, just to say, look, we have to come together, and for the last 3 years, I've had pressure to just do away with the union, not even sign the agreement, do like the state did in Pulaski County. I have willfully chosen not to do that because with the leadership of LREA at the time, the work that they did with Mr. Curris and the work that they did with Mr. Poore, I felt like we might get somewhere. But when I see these results that were released just a couple of weeks ago and understand that there is something else that's missing, and looking at the structures that are in place to move this school district forward, this is one of those impediments to moving forward. The fact that we cannot be agile and nimble with making changes at the classroom level, the school level. Principals need some flexibility. The district needs some flexibility in addressing leadership issues, and that's what we're trying to do here. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you all. Welcome as well. Let's close it down.
So any extension would be something that the negotiating team would
Don't
have
remember
to-
whose is whose
Oh,
here.
it's okay, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Just one quick question, you guys can't get back to the table for another assignment. And they're not willing to play ball or anything like that. So they go district. Not every teacher's part of the union. So is there a plan in place if that were to occur, or?
I mean, I think it's premature to plan for that. I mean, we need to see how they choose to respond.
All right, but you're not backing down on your language. All right, thank you for your time, appreciate it.
And so the extension is given to the team to decide whether or not there might be an extension of the current NA.
Yeah.
So you
They brought something like that.
October 31st is what's
Well, that's okay.
Okay.
Do y'all have any updates here on mobile control? And of course, this is kind of a takeover, going back to that, and there's kind of a timeline.